Auburn preview sponsored by the I-80 boys. Chris, I'll start us off here looking at Auburn, in their offense. Look, last year, Hugh Freeze, it was a first year, his first year could have been better, right? But it also could have been worse, I thought, too, right? Look, I thought last year Auburn's offense was pretty bad. I mean, let's just get that out in the clear. But it started with their inability to be able to throw the football. I really think teams were able to kind of come in, load the box up, and start trying to take some things away from them, and kind of really force Auburn to kind of be one-dimensional. I mean, even LSU's defense looked decent against Auburn, which that should tell you everything you need to know, right? Hugh Freeze, I mean, he did say a lot, about at SEC Media Days, I believe it was. He was talking about a lot of the offensive woes was due to him not calling the plays last year, right? They do bring in Derek Nix from Ole Miss to be their offensive coordinator this year. So Freeze is going to be calling more of the plays. So I think that might kind of help him a little bit. So we'll kind of just see how all that goes. I'm not really sure if that was 100% of the issues that they had last year. I think that was maybe a little part of it. So we'll see. Quarterback Peyton Thorne, he's back, and he's going to be on a short leash this year, right? He needs to get back to being that player he was at Michigan State at times, which is harder said than done when you come to the SEC, as we well know. Like last year, he did finish with 1,700 passing yards and 16 touchdowns to 10 interceptions, but he also had 500 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns, which, by the way, was finished tied for second, on the team in rushing yards. So that's, that does mean something there. Jaquez Hunter is going to be their lead back. I'm pretty sure he's going to build upon 1,000 yards and 7 touchdowns that he had from last year. I think the receiver room got some immediate upgrades this offseason, right? They got true freshman 5-star Cam Coleman. They also got Penn State transfer Keandre Lambert-Smith, who had 607 yards and 4 touchdowns last year at Penn State. So they did get an injection of talent in the wide receiver room, which is good for them. They also get back their tight end Rivaldo Fairweather, who led the team in receiving yards last year. And he did haul in 6 touchdowns, right? So they can throw the football a little bit. I know, at times they just didn't do it to the standard that I think we're used to seeing Auburn do it at, right? Their O-line, I think, should be much better this season, right? So that should kind of help them. I know last year they probably struggled at times in pass protection, so that kind of led to some certain things there. I think they're going to be better this year just by default. Chris, I'll throw it over to you. Tell me a little bit about that Tiger defense.
Yeah, this was the thing that kind of saved their butt last year. Their defense actually was pretty dang good last year. They only gave up 22.6 points per game. That was 43rd in the country. Now, the defense this year, though, they parted ways with defensive coordinator Ron Roberts, and they hired former Texas A&M defensive coordinator DJ Durkin. So Durkin's in there. And, Auburn did lose some guys to the NFL draft this offseason, but they did really well in the portal, actually. So they brought in that front 7, they brought in Gage Keys, Trill Carter, Isaiah Reichs, and Kieron Crawford. I think that's how you pronounce his name. So they did pretty well there. Those guys were all pretty highly rated in the portal. And they should be a little bit better getting to the passer this year as well. They struggled a little bit last year with sacks. I think they'll be fine there. Now, they do get back linebacker Jalen McLeod is one of the best pass rushers in the SEC last year. And both cornerbacks, Keith Scott and Kalen Lee, should be fine in the back. So at the back end, they're going to be all right there. Like I said, I expect this Auburn defense, Christian, to pick up where they left off last year, only giving up 22 points per game. That's not too bad in the SEC. So I'm going to jump right into the prediction here with Auburn. Now, Vegas has these guys pegged at 7.5 this year. I'm going to tell you guys off rip. I have them going 6-6. So I still have them making a bowl game. I know this is Hugh Freeze's second year, but you talked about the offense, Christian, and that's kind of the problem I have is that it was up and down last year. Peyton Thorne looked okay at times, didn't throw the ball particularly well. And, you start the year off with Alabama A&M. Now, that better be a win, right? And I have them beating Cal, who's now in the ACC. That game last year, remember, that was a late-night game. Probably 5 or 6 people were watching it. 2 of those were me and you. That game came down to the wire. Cal was not a very good football program last year. I don't expect them to be any better. I do expect Auburn to be better this year. Give me Auburn in that one. You got New Mexico. You better win that game. And then I have you losing to Arkansas. This game to me is a coin flip game. We don't really know what Arkansas is going to be this year. They lost a lot of pieces as well. But give me Arkansas in that game. Oklahoma. I wanted to pick Auburn here, but I can't. I just think Oklahoma has more talent offensively. And then you got at Georgia, at Mizzou, and at Kentucky. I have you dropping those 4 games, Oklahoma, Georgia, Missouri, and Kentucky, all in a row. Those teams are better teams, in my opinion. That's just all I can say about it. Unless that offense drastically changes this year for Auburn, it's going to be tough to shut those teams out and just rely on your defense every single game. You better beat Vanderbilt. We know that all-time series between those two is super close, which is crazy, but give me Auburn in that one. Louisiana Monroe, you better beat them. I have you dropping the game at A&M, and at the end of the year in the Iron Bowl, man, I know that game, throw the records out the window. I get all of that. The fact that it's at Alabama, I'm leaning Bama. So overall, Christian, I got them going 6-6. I want to hear your thoughts and tell me why I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not far off from you there, Chris. I got them going 7-5, right? Here's a crazy thing about Auburn's schedule that if you look at it, you're like, well, that's got to be a misprint. They only travel 4 times this year.
Yeah.
They only have to play on the road 4 times this year. They get 8 home games, so that does kind of help them out there. Here's the thing. I got losses to, I think they're going to start the year off beating Alabama, A&M, Cal, New Mexico, and then Arkansas, right? So they should start the year off, 4-0. Then you gotta play Oklahoma. Yes, it is at home. But I think, like I said, man, I think Oklahoma is going to be a little too much on the offensive side of the football for Auburn in this particular game. Then, like you said, I mean, you got Oklahoma, Georgia, at Missouri, and then Kentucky's not going to be a slouch either. But that's a really tough 3 to 4 game stretch right there, especially traveling on the road to play Georgia, Missouri, and Kentucky. So I think Oklahoma beats them. I think Georgia beats them. I think Missouri beats them, and I think Kentucky is going to beat them as well. And then they should beat Vandy, should beat UL Monroe. I'll give them a game, at home against Texas A&M. I'm going to give them that game.
Okay.
And then at Alabama, it was a close game last year, but it's at Alabama once again. I mean, man, I know Hugh Freeze, eventually he's going to win a game and he's going to get the crowd fired up, but I still think Bama's a little too much for him. Last year, I actually predicted they would beat Bama, in the offseason, and then it almost happened, but we know about the 4th and 31 and all that other stuff. So, yeah. So, with Chris, with that being said, let me ask you this. What's the floor? What's the ceiling for a team like Auburn?
I think the floor is probably pretty close to what I said. I would say 5 wins. I don't think Auburn is a terrible team. And what I mean by that is I actually think this year they'll be a better team than they were last year. The record just might not show it. This schedule isn't easy by any means. It starts off relatively, I want to say easy for a schedule. There's no such thing, but God, that middle stretch there, like you just pointed out, Oklahoma, and then you got to play 3 straight road games at Georgia, Mizzou, and Kentucky. I like I said, I agree with you on Kentucky. I think Kentucky's a physical team. The fact that it's on the road is going to be tough regardless. And, then you follow up with A&M and at Alabama at the end of the year. As far as a ceiling goes here, Peyton Thorne is going to have to play a hell of a lot better. And what I mean by that is he's going to have to be able to throw the ball. Now, I know they upgraded at wide receiver, and I get all that. I don't think Hugh Freeze is a bad coach. I would say 8 wins is probably the ceiling. I really do. They would have to beat like Oklahoma, then Kentucky, A&M, even if they lost to Bama, Mizzou, and Georgia, that's they could afford to lose another game in there somewhere. But Christian, I'm going to flip that around. I want to ask you the same question. What's the floor? What's the ceiling for the Auburn Tigers this year?
I'll say the floor is not far off from where we have them. I would say the floor for them would be maybe they drop a game to Arkansas, right? Maybe they drop a game to Texas A&M, right? So that would be like 5-7, and that's the floor. To me, that's like you said, that's the absolute floor for them. I think. But on the flip side of that, what's the ceiling? I'd say 8-9 wins. You go in and maybe you do beat Oklahoma, right? And maybe you do beat Kentucky. You get a win against Texas A&M, right? Like that's where you pick those wins up. Maybe you drop the game at A&M, but you beat Bama. So there's so many different combinations of this you could look at. And Auburn's one of those teams I feel like year in and year out where they're not an easy team to play at any stretch of the imagination. We know what they did to Bama and Georgia, last year, it just in how close those games were. But then they do things where they go out and they lose to like New Mexico or New Mexico State or whoever it is, and it's like, wow, we've seen that year over year from Auburn. It's kind of like, I hate to throw it out there, it's kind of like Nebraska in a way, right? You have to figure out a way to win these close games. You have to figure out a way to be consistent and be great. Auburn fans, and rightfully so, they demand more than just like a national championship every 7 or 8 years, or relevancy every 7 or 8 years. I think they want to be consistent. They've won a couple of national championships, and played for a couple of national championships, I should say, as well, since the start of the 2000s. So they're a program kind of like LSU, I think, in a way where like, hey, they aren't going to put up with mediocrity for more than like 2 or 3 years. I mean, they are setting the standard in that way where, if you can't come in and you can't produce, then we're going to harshen that ass and we're going to get rid of you.